My name is Basil Siokos, and I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. I'm honored to have with me today acclaimed filmmaker Julien Temple to talk with us about his latest film, Crock of Gold, A Few Rounds with Shane Macgowan. It's a tribute of sorts to the Irish musician, best known as the frontman for the Pogues. Julien, thanks so much for joining us and for being part of Doc NYC.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. You have an extensive background with music-related projects. You've directed scores of music videos. You've made notable documentaries on the Sex Pistols, on Joe Strummer, Glastonbury, among others. And you also have a connection with the London punk scene. This project, a project about Shane Macgowan, seems like a natural fit. Can you talk a little bit about when and how the film originated?
Well, actually, I was the first person ever to interview Shane Macgowan back in 1976, when I was a film student on leave, should we call it, leave of absence. I was playing hooky from film school because I'd seen the Sex Pistols and I'd managed to get a key made to the film school, the National Film School of Great Britain camera room. So I could go there when everyone had gone for the end of the day, and I could get a camera out as long as I got it back before the next morning. I could do what I liked with it, basically. So I used to film the Sex Pistols, and that wasn't the easiest thing because there was a guy called Malcolm McLaren who was their manager on the door, stopping anyone coming in with a camera. So we had, or with a still camera, no one had film cameras at that time, but we had to take it apart, you know, hide the lens in one pocket and the magazine down your pants, and then you'd have to go to the toilets and the men's room, whatever you call it, and put it back together, and then you'd have to kind of sneak around with it under your raincoat and get glimpses. That's how my camera style began, and
right.
It hasn't improved much since. But yeah, Shane, when Sid Vicious left the crowd, and he'd been the great face in the crowd, the great kind of focal point of the early punk scene in the crowd, he joined the Sex Pistols. The next guy who stepped up to the plate, if you were filming, you couldn't help, your camera would settle on Shane Macgowan because he was so into it, so deeply into it that it was amazing. You would have had no idea that he was Irish at that point, which was funny. He was just another London street kid putting on a thick London accent, you know, so, you know, like Joe Strummer kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I did the first interview with him ages ago. So the film really started there. But actually, he asked me through a mutual acquaintance to see whether I'd be interested in doing a film about him. And obviously his reputation precedes him. So I wasn't sure that at this point in my life, I needed to go through something like that. But and I was busy on another film, so I kind of couldn't really say yes or no at that point. But then Johnny Depp got involved helping them film the 60th birthday concert where Shane got a kind of honor from the Irish state, the president, Legion d'honneur type thing of Ireland. And when Johnny was involved, because I'd known Johnny from when I lived in LA, I felt there was a kind of ally, you know, there was some kind of weight to get the thing done if we ran into the rocks, which we were certain to do. So yeah, that's how it came about. And, you know, I kind of jumped at the chance to do something about England and Ireland, which is an extraordinary story of two countries. And Shane's right in the middle, because obviously he's Irish, first generation, grew up in London, as I said, you know, thick Cockney kind of persona, and then reinvented himself as Mr. Ireland, you know, so it's a kind of interesting, he's right in the middle of these two civilizations.
Right. And I mean, you just said this, but like, you know, it's clear what comes through very, very clear in the film is Shane's unique and somewhat cantankerous personality, let's say. It doesn't seem like he's the kind of person that you could really direct and say, sit in this chair and tell this story or whatever. So how much of his personality did dictate the choices that you made in your approach to how to put this film together? Did you have to change your plans, or did you just kind of, you know, wing it, or how did that go about?
Yeah. No, it's like filming the snow leopard, you know, once in every 3 months, if you lined up the camera, you might get a glimpse of him passing by. I mean, we spent days waiting for him to no show, you know, with crews and art departments, so crazy amount of grief on the film. But, you know, in a weird way, his refusal to do interviews or his backing out of them at the last minute was kind of him directing the film. You know, the harder he made it, the more you were painted into a corner, the more invented you had to be to get out of it, you know. I mean, a lot of the film is just reaction shots of him from one of the conversations we did, which normally would just go on the cutting room floor, but for us, because we had nothing else, they were kind of gold dust, you know. So yeah, I don't think in many ways it could have been much more difficult. And there were times, you know, I think all of us wanted to bail ship, but there's something about the guy. I mean, despite that side of his personality, there is something in there. There is gold in him. You know, there's a crock of shit and there's a crock of gold, you know.
Right.
Or in the same crock resides both these substances. But he is a fascinating, highly intelligent, highly generous and weirdly lovable guy, you know. So I'm glad I stuck with it. I hope it does him justice. I think there's only one Shane MacGowan, so it's quite a unique film, probably.
That's for sure.
And I've worked with some difficult ones, you know. I've worked with people like Johnny Rotten,
right?
They can't bite the head off a rattlesnake, you know. So yeah, I've seen them come, and Shane's up there with them, you know. Beyond
yeah, for sure. Well, I'd love to talk about, I mean, you know, clearly you don't take a very traditional music doc approach. There's not a talking heads parade of ex-bandmates and music critics extolling his virtues, etc. But these conversations
I hate that shit.
Yeah,
I absolutely hate it. My mission was to destroy what I used to call rockumentary. You know, which is that idiot at the mixing desk or some wrinkly old rock star in an armchair talking about where they recorded their album, you know, which means nothing to anyone. Bullshit, you know. Anyway, carry on with your question.
Absolutely. But I find it so interesting that you paired him with such interesting figures. You know, notably Sinn Féin's Jerry Adams, Johnny Depp, who, you know, you already explained has a connection with him. But you know, how did you decide who to try to put him with? Was it kind of like who's going to have the most interesting a conversation with him? Is it people that you thought he would respond to, people that he asked to talk to? Like, how did those decisions come about?
I think the people who would dare to talk to him, you know, be put in front of him in the lion's den kind of thing. But we were hoping that I think it works that we got I didn't want endless conversations, obviously, because I wanted Shane telling his story. The fact that he didn't do the straight interviews, you know, that kind of really boring talking to a camera where no one's really themselves and it's very forced and it's visually dead for the most part, meant that we had to scour the known world for, you know, any bit of cassette recording that some journalist might have done with Shane in Finland in 4 a.m. in a bar in 1985 or something. And it didn't seem to matter in the end what the quality was like, as long as you could hear it or subtitle it, it didn't really matter. But in terms of the people we chose or people that turned up, you know, a lot of people said, no way. But, you know, other people said yes. And I think we tried to get a balance which showed different facets of Shane himself, you know. I mean, with Jerry, he's like a kind of school kid with the commander, you know, the great leader. And, you know, with Bobby Gillespie, he's bizarrely the opposite. He's like, you know, torturing this guy and making him feel really bad. And then you've got him with Johnny, where he's kind of an equal old friend. So you see a different side of him there. So hopefully you can use those conversations to show different aspects of this many-faceted human being, shall we say.
Right. And an element of that in the film is also in its structure, which I think, you know, you've got these conversations, which are kind of the contemporary, him telling the story, but really the present day. But you've also got the fantastic animation, which helps to sort of illuminate the past. You got all this fantastic archival. So can you talk a little bit about sort of balancing all of that together, finding the structure of the film, like, was that something that you knew you were going to do from the beginning, or is that something that came about as you worked on it, edited, etc.?
Yeah, my approach to films like this is to not have a clue really what you're going to do before. I think that filmmaker without a clue is a good way of making documentaries, and kind of, you know, not fooling yourself that you really know how to do it, you know. So I think every time should be a different kind of trip really. And yeah, I you know, I've used elements, you know, animation I did back in the Rock and Roll Swindle. Like I had to made the Sex Pistols into cartoons, for which they never forgave me. Like, they're rock stars, not fucking cartoons, you know. And now, of course, you have gorillas and bands that are, you know, very proud to call themselves cartoons. So times change. But, you know, when you don't have any other way of illustrating the kind of emotional story, drama, cartoons are a great option. I love directing animation. Tex Avery is one of my, and Frank Tashlin as well, are hugely favorite directors of mine. So anarchic and so disrespectful to the audience, to the producers, to the whole system, basically, those guys. So, you know, I've always had a very fond spot for that kind of anti-Disney animation. You know, it was fun to play with the different styles, you know, you know, when he was a kid in Ireland in the farmyard, it's kind of Orwell's Animal Farm, you know, that 50s animated thing. And obviously it's a kind of classic, more slightly Disney-esque thing at the beginning. And then we have our Crumb and various psychedelia and Japanese anime, and when he's in Japan, you know, so it was a lot of fun to play around. I mean, I love different formats anyway. I think, you know, seeing films like this, where you've got a lot of archive, you're anyway going to have incredible number of different textures, and from really awfully telecine, you know, the way these libraries treat this footage is incredible. It looks so awful sometimes, but you make a virtue out of that, you know, and you shoot Super 8, you shoot 16, you shoot HD, you know, it's you know, it creates again a multifaceted way of viewing things, you know, which I think complements a person and their life and their contradictions, because they're different things at different moments and to different people, you know. I mean, it's I like it. It's kind of a punk attitude to the filmmaking that I had from the beginning with the Rock and Roll Swindle, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, it fits in particular for this film, it fits it so well to kind of capture you know, you're capturing 60 years of this person's life, and it changed over time, and it also had this anarchic energy to it, which I think really comes through with the different approaches.
Right, good.
I do want to add one sort of final question for me, which is a little bit more serious, which is that, you know, it's clear from the film the political dimension of Shane's songwriting and his experience with the Pogues and its relation to his Irish identity specifically. Can you speak about making this film at this particular moment in history when issues of nationalism are so prominent and divisive around the world today?
Yeah, particularly obviously in America, where you're on the cliff edge, but we've got this ridiculous thing called Brexit, where they've managed to, you know, shoot themselves in the chest, you know, these guys who run our show. And one of the big fault lines in that is obviously the Northern Ireland border. So the whole Irish question is, again, very current for us in Britain now. And it's astonishing to me how little, particularly English kids, know about the history of England in Ireland. You know, it was our first colony. Our first slaves were sent from Ireland to the Caribbean, you know, before we had the idea of ransacking Africa for people. We had our own little dirty backyard in Ireland, and you know, we've oppressed Ireland and got rich from Ireland over 8 centuries. You know, so it's an interesting time to look at their struggle for freedom, which is so much to, you know, so much illuminates Shane's whole whole attitude, you know, in a sense, you know, I was surprised to learn that it was almost a crusade for him, a mission to reclaim, you know, that kind of Irish cultural musical heritage in a hip way with the Pogues. And you know, he certainly succeeded in doing that, and he certainly belongs in that grand tradition, and not just of musicians, but of literary figures like Joyce and Brendan Behan and Flann O'Brien, you know, all great figures of Irish, the magnificent use that Irish people have made of the English language, you know, which is better than most English people could have managed, you know. So it was fascinating to do that, and particularly at this time, to put a rocket up Boris Johnson and people like that, arse, or whatever you want to call it, ass, because you know they are the most ridiculous, foolish pupils of Trump, and we don't need them running our country, you know.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much again for this conversation and for bringing this film to Doc NYC. Thank you again, Julien Temple, for Crock of Golds, a few rounds of Shane Macgowan. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.